everybody, and welcome to lesson 2 of the series. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of discipling your children. So let's go. So thank you everybody for joining me again this week, and today I'm very excited to share about the importance of discipling your children. When I learned about this, it was just so powerful to hear about these truths, and it really just goes to show that when you're at home or just being a faithful mother or father, that you can actually have an impact on the whole world from the comfort of your own home. So that's why it's so important just to do what God called you to do, and be where be the part of the body that God designed you to be, because you're going to have the most impact being in that part of the body than trying to be someone that you're not, or trying to do something that God didn't call you to do, right? So fathers and mothers are called to disciple our children. Ephesians 6:4 says, "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." So that's a mandate that God gives us, that we need to bring up our kids in the training and admonition of the Lord. So we're required to teach our children about the Lord. And how important is it? That's an eternal impact that you're having on your children, whether you're going to teach them about the Lord or whether you're not. So, but we, it's in our best interest and the best interest of our children, if we do teach them about the Lord, obviously. Right? So this is an illustration about the power of discipleship versus the power of evangelism. And this is by Andrew Womack, and he gives this illustration. It's so powerful. So if you worked really hard and evangelized 1,000 people per year for 15 years, you would think, if you saw someone and they were an evangelist and they evangelized, they got 1,000 people saved a year for 15 years, you would think that they were just phenomenal, amazing, but if they did that, there would be 15,000 new believers, right? However, if you led one person to the Lord every 6 months, and then spent the next 6 months discipling that person so that they could reproduce themselves, in 1 year you would have 2 disciples, okay? So that means that, you say you lead someone to the Lord, and then you spend 6 months discipling that person so that you could reproduce yourself. So now that person would get someone else saved, and then spend 6 months with the next person, and then would reproduce themselves. After 1 year, you would only have 2 disciples. So it'd be you and 2 disciples. However, after 16 and a half years, if everyone reproduced themselves every 6 months, there would be nearly 7 billion disciples. So in 15 years, one person could have 15,000 disciples, or by actual discipling, not just evangelizing, you would have, more than what's in the earth after 16 and a half years, which is just powerful. So, but you may think that discipling one person every 6 months is different to discipling one child or a handful of children every 18 years. But Mary, the mother of Jesus, impacted the world raising her son. So did Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. And what about the mother of Billy Graham, right? That was time well spent for the kingdom. And just because you're only raising just a handful doesn't mean that you can't have just as much of an impact on the world. So Luke 7:28 says, "For I say to you, among those born of women, there is not a greater prophet than John the Baptist, but he who is the least in the kingdom is greater than he." So I actually talked about, in my last lesson about, Mary, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and, how, if we just thought about, okay, if all they did was raise their sons well, how powerful is their impact on the world? But it even says here that he who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than John the Baptist. So that means that every child that we are raising is greater than John the Baptist. So do you see it that way? So your little kids that you're raising, do you see them through the eyes of Jesus? Do you see that each and every one of them are greater than John the Baptist? Excuse me. And if you just focus on raising them, and if that's all you did, how powerful would your impact be? Right? So here is another powerful illustration. A study was done on the descendants of two men, one godly and one ungodly. The godly man is named Jonathan Edwards. He was a Puritan preacher in the 1700s. He and his wife Sarah had 11 children. Every night when Mr. Edwards was home, he would spend an hour conversing with his family and then prayed a blessing over each one. They passed on a great godly legacy to their children. And the ungodly man is named Max Jukes. He lived around the same time period as Jonathan Edwards, and 150 years later, their descendants were studied. So Mr. Edwards' legacy included, out of his offspring, there was one US vice president, one dean of law school, one dean of medical school, 3 US senators, 3 governors, 3 mayors, 13 college presidents, 30 judges, 60 doctors, 65 professors, 75 military officers, 80 public office holders, 100 lawyers, 100 clergymen, and 285 college graduates. So imagine being, Sarah, the wife of Jonathan, and she had 11 kids. Can you imagine? So that took up all of her time. And she could be thinking, man, I'm not doing anything, to impact the world, anything for ministry. I'm just at home raising my kids. And, it can get pretty monotonous when you're just changing diapers, cooking dinner, cleaning, doing the laundry. For the most part, they're thankless jobs, but not to God. They're all important jobs because you all create the atmosphere, to have a godly home, to raise your children with excellence, who will then, go out and do the work of the ministry, whether it's raising their own kids or being missionaries or televangelists or whatever it is, right? So she had a huge impact in just raising those 11 children well. You see that. So Mr. Duke's legacy, okay, so he's the ungodly man. His legacy included 7 murderers, 60 thieves, 190 prostitutes, 150 other convicts, 310 paupers, and for those of you that don't know what pauper is, it's just a poor person, and 440 who were physically wrecked by addiction to alcohol. Of the 1,200 descendants that were studied, 300 died prematurely. And as I was preparing this message, the Lord spoke to me the scripture, Deuteronomy 30:19. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both you and your descendants might live. So you think that your lifestyle and the way you live your life isn't affecting anybody? It is. It's actually affecting a lot of people. That's why it's so important to choose life, choose excellence, choose to do things the way that the Lord will want you to do them, because you're going to impact people's lives and you want to do it for the greater. You don't want to be responsible, for them not knowing the Lord for the most part, right? So it was stated that much of the capacity, talent, intensity, and character of the more than 1,400 of Edwards' family was due to Mrs. Edwards. So it wasn't just Mr. Edwards' influence, because guess who's at home with the kids most? And it was Mrs. Edwards. But obviously Mr. Edwards had a huge impact on that as well, because he was a godly father and he spent time with his children and training them up in the fear and admonition of the Lord, right? So here's another great illustration. Have you heard of Edward Kimball? So I hadn't heard of Edward Kimball. And when I actually taught this to my class, I think maybe 2 people had heard of Edward Kimball, but that was a Bible college, so they don't count, right? So Edward Kimball led D.L. Moody to the Lord. And under Moody's ministry, Wilbur Chapman was saved. Billy Sunday was converted by Chapman's preaching. Through Sunday's preaching, Mordecai Ham was saved, and Billy Graham came to Christ at a Ham crusade. So as you can see, no one knows of Edward Kimball, but he did his, did his place. He took his place in the body, and the Lord used him to lead D.L. Moody to the Lord, who already had a huge impact. And D.L. Moody, under his ministry was Wilbur Chapman. Under Chapman was Billy Sunday. Through Sunday's preaching, Mordecai Ham was saved. And Billy Graham came to Christ at a Ham crusade. So it just goes to show, just one person doing their part in the body can have a huge impact for eternity, because, who knows the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that, were led to the Lord through the ministry of Billy Graham. So hopefully that encouraged you, just to show you that, if you're just, a stay-at-home mom with your children, or if you're just a father, providing for your family, then you're having an amazing impact. Just because you're not on stage, preaching, or in Africa being a missionary, it doesn't mean that you're not doing what God has called you to do, because it is very honorable, as a husband to provide for your family, and God highly honors that. It's important. Your children and your wife need it. If you're a wife just staying at home, raising your children just day in, day out, serving them, loving on them, teaching them, being there for them, and you're just thinking, like I thought, man, I'm not doing anything for the kingdom. These children are taking all my time and all my energy, and I'm just not doing anything for the Lord. I just want to encourage you, you're doing everything for the Lord. Everything that you're doing for your children, everything that you're doing for your children, every time you change a diaper, every time you cook dinner, it's like you're doing it as unto Jesus. It says that in the Word. So it'd be important for you just to, meditate on that. So as you're, going about your day and washing the dishes and cooking the food and feeding them and then cleaning up afterwards and changing a diaper for the upteenth time, just imagine that you're doing it as unto Jesus, because that's how you're going to be rewarded. It's very important. And not only that, the impact that you can have for future generations and for eternity, just doing that with excellence is just, you're not going to know this side of heaven, the impact that you're going to have just by being obedient in the small things and doing them with excellence. So hopefully this is encouraging to you. Thank you for tuning in again, and I will see you next week.